unfortunately, and Nathaniel, I'm so sorry, I have to go, and I'm sorry to miss your presentation. I really want to thank these three artists, Mary, Saskia, and Nathaniel, for taking the time to be here, because I think sharing their experiences with you really will help, I hope, help all of you, and that you feel that this has been a good workshop. So, and Jennifer has been videotaping, and we are going to just PDF the PowerPoints as well to have them up there for information, or if you know other artists who couldn't come who want to take a look at it.
Thanks. So, unlike my colleagues, I'm pretty much incapable of making intricate, beautiful statements that are subtle. I tend to make things that are a little more bombastic. But I guess where I started years ago was trying to make interactive artwork. This piece right here, this was part of a series of intimators, and the idea was that you would have, this is a really poor illustration of the idea, but you are in one section of the gallery, you encounter one part of the piece, and then in another part of the gallery, you could hear the other people responding to what's going on in the gallery. So they were actually much further apart in the final installation, but I like the idea of overhearing people, trying to get people to interact with art. And I found, just in general, that whenever you want someone to interact with art, they will not do it. And when you, by all means, do not want them to touch any part of your artwork, they will grope it profusely. This was another intimator. This one, I was really into design aesthetic. This one was Intimator 4, and the idea behind this was it was like a workout machine where it had vibrating cups where you could mutually stimulate the genitals of a neighboring person, so your switch controlled their vagina. So again, interaction, and the interesting part with this is actually, if you look at the piece, there's only one handle. And so people would get on and be like, oh, it's funny, it's weird, it's so weird. And they get on, and then when they go to hold themselves onto the piece, there's only the one handle, and then they have a real moment of intimacy where they have to kind of they're either grabbing the bottom or the top of the handle. That's fun. This piece is a giant movable tongue. This was a commission during the end of my tenure at, well, not tenure, but the end of my time at ASU. I applied for a public art grant there, and so this was right when Tempe Town Lake drained. So when the levee or the dams broke. And so prior to this, I had made a cast of my own tongue, and I had been casting them in silicone and then giving them to people, and I had a website, and it was like showmeMyTongue.com. And it was this weird, it was, again, very strange, a bunch of strange interactions, and I would just give them to random people. I would go around, I went to different cities and stuff, giving people tongues. And then I got weird stuff back, but not as weird, not the kind of weird you're expecting. But, so through that, I was one day, the application was due. I didn't plan ahead at all. I was just I got a board, I flocked a board, made a cutout of a person, stuck one of the tongues on the board, took a picture of it, wrote a page, sent it in, and I got it. One of you asked about the idea of, well, how do you break into public art? And this piece, I was living in Boston at the time, and I think maybe besides make good work, that's number one, make good work, but the next most important thing is just showing up. It was a rainy night in Boston, and my wife and I were sitting around, and she saw something online. It was like an artist meetup, and a woman was showing the work of her long deceased father, and it was just like a weird night out, and I was, okay, let's go. And I ended up meeting, because we were one of like 4 people who showed up, I ended up meeting this a public plan, like a city planner who was involved in this project called Bartlett Yard, and in that there was an abandoned bus depot that had about 100 stalls for different buses, and they were looking for local artists to, in some cases, paint the front of the doors, or just make the space, do something with the space. And the idea was, for months, they would have parties, they would have get-togethers, like community get-togethers. The idea, they were approaching revitalizing a community in a way that wasn't just purely gentrification. It was a way of actually bringing the community into it, with artist housing planned for the eventually to be integrated into the whole thing, but also housing for, there was also luxury condos, but it wasn't in such a way that it was excluding the community at large, because there had been all sorts of really negative experiences back in the 70s with terrible slumlords and so on. And so my wife and I applied, and we ended up getting a grant for it, and one of the few people who did get grants for it. And it was just, it was a little more street art influenced. I was living in an apartment at the time, so I was carving this guy out of styrofoam. He's about 7 feet tall. Carving this out of styrofoam in my foyer of my 900 square foot apartment. And my wife painted the machinery, and then I came up with a bunch of these icon stencils, and we wallpapered the wall. And it was trying to, more than anything, we were just kind of reconciling living in Boston, and she was from Arizona, so we had this kind of back and forth about that. And we were actually on our way to moving back to Arizona. And so I moved back to Arizona, and I applied to Influx, and I used work that I wasn't really sure people were going to respond to. I thought that was actually really nice that a lot of the people on the panels could see, oh, you're good at making something that may be like conceptually a little more. Because it might be like you might imagine, well, okay, he does work where he meets people on Craigslist and they pose nude wearing giant furry heads or something, but they can see through that. Oh yes, this person can also make good work, and they can make something that is publicly accessible. And so we had just moved back, and I was totally strapped for an idea. So we ended up. I was like, okay, I'm going to go climb Camelback Mountain, and I'm just going to think. And so we went and we climbed Camelback Mountain, and it was my first time since I had gotten back. And we got up to the top, and I just sat there, and I looked out over Phoenix, and I looked, and I was like, none of this belongs here. This is all so strange. There are all these weird patches, and people trying to put things that don't belong there. And it's nothing, like half the people who live here are transplants, and like there's a bunch of pools and lawns and all sorts of weird things. So I had this idea of sort of an omnipresent, Apollo type character, a massive sun god who's completely ambivalent to everything you're doing, surrounded by, in this case, there are ice creams that were melting, and the false pool and the lawn, and then also a giant sign, because anywhere in Phoenix is usually about a quarter of a mile away from the airport. So, and the only thing that belonged there was this little indifferent cactus. And he's, not crazy about what's going on, but he's just there. And this piece was an interesting one because it grew as it went on. I was actually given more money to expand on the idea. I like to make, with my public projects, I don't have this one, I have this vision of a thing and I'm going to make it perfect. Because that also, I think in some ways that can set you up for some kind of disappointment, because there's always, you're going to get notes, you're going to get people, you're going to get, there's a conversation, or you're going to find out, like, that just isn't a practical thing to do, right? And so if you have some kind of flexibility, you can have a conversation where you're like, oh yeah, no, that's it, you're right, that's a good idea. I'll pull, I'll move, and you like water. So I actually, one time I was working and I had the door open, and I had this guy walk up with a red Solo cup, in red shorts, with no shirt on, walk up, and hey bro, what you working on? And I was like, I pointed at him, and I pointed at this sculpture.
It's a portrait, man.
Yeah, he didn't pick up on it. He was just like, So it was a really interesting experience. Again, lots of transplants. So through this one, it seems a lot of the public art that I've gotten has been through trying to really show people what you're thinking. And so a lot of my background is in graphic design. I'm pretty good with Photoshop. So right after this, I took this hot dog, this picture of this hot dog, and there was Artel, which is it was a few years ago. They did 2 rounds of Artel, where it's a hotel where it's kind of like a haunted house, but instead of a haunted house, it's like art. And so you go to different rooms, and there's art. And I requested a public space out in the open, and so I took this and I photoshopped this hot dog into laying on a deck chair and next to a bunch of people by a pool. And the people who I applied to actually thought that I had already made the piece because I made the Photoshop a little too good. And so then they're like, oh yeah, when can you bring it down? And I was like, just a minute. So then I made it, and so it was a piece that was not intended to be totally interactive, but people could not stop touching it. And there was like a tired old grandpa sitting on the end, like sitting on the very bottom of that deck chair the night of the opening, with like 7 grandkids hanging off of him, and all the kids were like hugging the hot dog. It's just the weirdest thing. Like the people were just they like, oh yeah, that's what you do with art. And so, and I know it's silly and it's fun, and it wasn't, it's not like there's some deep like wiener meeting here, but it's one of those things where like this, I walked up and I was just watching people interact with it, and this woman walks up and she sticks her hand in his mouth and grabs the teeth and goes, and they broke, and she goes, and I'm like, what are you doing? And she goes, well, my friend said that they felt like real teeth, and you're not opening a car door, you're gonna touch them. And then I had to reattach it, and it was funny. So he currently lives in my father-in-law's pool. So he has a styrofoam core, so he floats. It's really fun. So as you can see, a lot of the public art stuff that I do is it's very light. I'm with public art, I'm not always thinking about, well, what statement am I going to make. It's a little more expressionistic, it's a little more silly, and oftentimes it bridges more into design work. And so I actually don't have a problem reconciling those two things, because I'm also a designer. I make heavy art about terrorism or the Craigslist killer, those sorts of things. But I also, I have a kid, and I know I like to play and I like to have fun. So this one is called Fun Beans Quarter Smile. And taking some of the iconography that I had before through the ASU Art Museum, it was a small stipend. I ended up creating kind of like a day of interactive activities. This was a cornhole using Arizona-based things. This one's an orange slices, miserable citrus. And then the sun had little rainbows you could throw into it, and then there was a tic-tac-toe board, This one was inspired by my time living in Boston. My daughter got to be about 2 years old, and I realized she didn't know how to use stairs because we lived in an apartment building. And so, we were walking. I was trying to get her to walk upstairs. So, as practice, there was one set of stairs in our building, and it was in our gym. So I went and got a yoga ball from the gym, and I would make her push, like a Sisyphean manner, push the yoga ball up the stairs. So I thought, oh, this would actually be a pretty fun game for kids. So this is part of, again, family day. So for the older kids, they had to kick it up, but the little kids could push it up. There was an egg balance, but instead of eggs, it was little ping pong balls with faces, and I created these like little pathways. And this was all in the midst of my current project that is finishing up very soon, the Catacombs of Professor McGee. So this is a project that I had applied for 2 years ago, and I didn't get it that year. And I got an email saying, well, you're going to be shortlisted for the following year. We're not doing an open call next year. You're one of 4 artists. And so it got to be 1 year later, and I was sitting there and I was looking through my emails. I was like, oh, well, they didn't send anything. I guess I didn't get it. Well, I'm really busy right now, so I don't really need it anyway. It's just whatever. And then about 2 weeks later, I got an email, and it said something, or no, it was a phone call from Wendy, I believe, and she was like, "You got it!" And I was like, "Got what?" Because they had said, "Well, you can reapply next year." That was the caveat, like you can reapply. And she's like, "You got it!" And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she's like, "Well, you got with your proposal from the year before." And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure, okay, that sounds good." And so then I had to go back to my old proposal and go through and okay, what did I apply with? What are all the details of my application? And so I had, went through all the little Photoshop things that I had done, and it took me a while because, the beginning part was a little slow, the gestation period, it was coming up with ideas, trying to figure out where you're going to go with things. And I also didn't have a space where I could work at the time. So it was all just planning and planning and planning and planning and planning. And, and usually my ideas come in fits and starts where about 2 o'clock in the morning I wake up, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to do this. This is going to be, okay, I understand now. And so I created kind of an idea book for, it was like a Pinterest wall of concepts, so that I could share with the people who were going to be helping with the project. Which, by the way, if you don't know, Scottsdale Public Art is without a doubt one of the most helpful groups of creative individuals who want you to succeed so badly and will do everything they can to help you. I can't say enough positive about everyone there. And so, to make sure that everybody was on the same page with the ideas, I sent them just a big collection of influences that I was starting out with. And the premise of the Catacombs of Professor McGee is it's 100 years ago. This eccentric professor's wife disappears, and then eventually the house disappears, and there's just this big hole in the ground. And 100 years later on that same site, which is the site of the Civic Center Library, the house reemerges from the floor, and then there's mysteries to solve and places to explore. And my idea with this was I didn't want to create a space that was prescribed play. As a teacher and a parent, I was trying to come up with something that would be more imaginative play. And it's challenging now because of a lot of the kids are very often prescribed play, and they have a manual or they have a game that has a direction. And so what I wanted to do was create multiple spaces that would have, you could play my game, which is, I have, there's a book and you can follow through, but you can also just be in that space and play your own game. And so I created multiple spaces. This was I tried to make it seem authentico, so this is the newspaper that's at the front of the exhibit. These are some of the plans, so I was trying to get the scale correct, because as Saskia said, that space is cavernous. And so there's so much space to fill. And I plotted almost everything out in Illustrator between Roy Wasson and Daniel Funkhauser. They're both incredible lifesavers who work for Scottsdale Public Art, but I tried to be as clear as possible and tried to give as detailed designs as I possibly could. I used to work as a toy designer, so a lot of these are, like I've mapped out the spacing of the holes for the plinko drop and so on. And there was also a performative element that went along with this, in addition to a ton of programming, where I wanted to, because he's a professor, I wanted to kind of create a link between science and art. And so all of the people who did, all the people who I brought in were friends of mine, who are creative people who are also really interested in bridging that gap between art and science. So, it's sort of edutainment. And so I perform as the professor and introduce all of these things. You can see, I was describing to a student at one point after I submitted this design, I was like, so I thought, I'm gonna do this, and I went through the whole thing, and at the end my student goes, so you're gonna build an entire house in 3 months. Oh no. And so before that, through Scottsdale Public Art, I did, and I'm just finishing up my residency in the livery stable, because when I applied for this project, I was living in a house, and I thought, oh, I'll just keep all my stuff at the house. But then I moved to a condo, and by the time I got it, I was in a condo. So at the livery, I built all of the framing for the house, did all the design work, did a lot of stuff on my own, probably to a fault. But trying to figure out what is delegatable is also really important. You have to convey your vision solidly enough to people that when you hand it off, they can take it and run with it. And that it's like that kind of communication is really hard for me, and it takes me a lot. I have to, without, you don't want to be constantly, saying, no, you're doing it wrong. I want purples and this and that. You don't want to be like that, but you also have to maintain like a very specific vision. So trying to communicate that is really important. And so there's all kinds of little interactive things that are for big kids, little kids, places to relax, places to interact with. Kids are amazing at destroying things. really good. Really, they figure it, and there are some things where I thought, oh, that's gonna break in a day, and they didn't touch it, they didn't do a thing to it. But then there are things I'm like, this is bulletproof, this will survive a nuclear winter, and they find a way to destroy it. So, but based on the initial drawing, you can see it ended up being very close to the original vision. Like I said, with my graphic design background, I also designed all the booklets, a lot of the promotional stuff. But through that, I've also had a lot of assistance through Scottsdale Public Art, who've taken design elements that I put in and really run with it, and have done a great job. Within the space, there's also different levels of interaction. There are hidden things in the carpet. There's a bookshelf that moves. The eyes in the portrait move. You can, and then weird things that I didn't really foresee. But you're trying to make a place with secret hidey holes, but parents have to be able to see their children at all times. So you're creating like a dollhouse of closed and open spaces. And then there's a dress-up section, funhouse mirror. Also always with education being a big element of it, but creating an element of mystery and a place for imagination to happen. and it's much to the chagrin of many librarians. Unfortunately, and fortunately, the kids are really engaging with the space and playing very loudly. So I have a lot of grumpy librarians, which I feel bad about, but I also don't feel bad about because they are having a lot of fun, and it's like every day. So librarians, I'm sure, will be very relieved when everything is done. Things evolve over time. Like as you can see, this part of the mine car was actually added because we discovered as time went on that kids like to climb it and jump out of it, and it doesn't look like it, but that's it's about 4 or 5 feet. So evolving, learning to be adaptable. The floor is lava. If you've ever played that, where you put pillows on the ground and you jump from pillow to pillow, but instead it's real lava. There's my indifferent cactus. There's another view of the space. And interacting with the kids is a lot of fun, playing a character. I've done some theater years ago, and I really like ad-libbing, and I think that's reflected also in my art process to some degree, because I think it's really important to be able to creatively problem solve, and I think that's a lot like ad-libbing. And then also throughout, I've been adding little things as time goes on, because for some kids this is the only thing they do all summer. And so there are different elements, like there's a glass-in room where there's this giant barrel cactus that was added later for the kids who went to the petroglyph party, where they made their own petroglyphs, were able to put their petroglyphs in the space, so their work is on display there. But yeah, so it's going to be a lot of fun to, once the party is on the 27th, and it's for grown-ups and kids alike, and live action sort of clue mystery solving. A lot of fun. So, Q&A.
Well, thank you to our 3 artists. That's a lot of good lessons learned and great information for you all. We're here to noon, but we're a little past noon, so you asked a lot of questions earlier. If you have a couple of quick questions we could do now, or our business cards are out on the table at registration. My card, Donna's card, Jennifer's. Grab those cards, email us, call us with further questions if you want. Yeah.
The Influx bus tour, what time of year is that going to be going now?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. In the news cycle, we have Fountain Hills, Surprise, and Peoria coming on, and we're giving up the idea of the bus tour because to drive from Fountain Hills to Gilbert to Surprise to Glendale would be too much for one day. So we're revisioning that event as maybe something like an art detour where we give you a self-guided map and you go around, and the artists are available at each site for you to talk to. So stay tuned for that. We're going to try and do that in October, like have an influx month where every weekend there's different openings across the valley. So that's going to shift a bit. Anything else? Yeah.
Once you've done influx in one city, can you apply for other cities?
Yep, you're fine. You can't do consecutive cycles, so you have to wait a cycle. So if you're in 4, you have to wait till 6. But yeah, you can apply for other cities around the valley, for sure. Back there.
Does Scottsdale Public Art maintain a list of vendors or suppliers that we can work with in terms of buying materials that are local to the valley?
We do have that information. If you want to email us or call us, we can give you some of the vendors that we work with and things, and maybe we can get that on our website at some point in the future. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and spread the word to your friend artists. Look for the video online, and we'll do these in the future. So thank you all for coming.